How does the relationships between the clubs work when transfers happen? Because I think what we've seen, haven't we, Jerry, in the last, it's got to be over 5-6 years now, is that relationship built between two rivals in Arsenal and Chelsea.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen Petr Cech go, Chelsea legend, by the way.
Yeah.
We've seen David Luiz, Willian, not
Fabregas.
to mention Fabregas.
And
now
Jorginho,
Kai Havertz. Is it quite crazy how two rivals can almost let the players happen? Because the transfers that have happened have been quite smooth, haven't they?
Yeah. And Giroud was a great player, wasn't he?
Actually, Cole, that wasn't so smooth.
No, that wasn't. No. Does it help? I don't know. I think that there is sort of that tension and stuff still with the deals, but certainly I think there's a pragmatism in modern football. The chairman always go and meet up and stuff like that. So I think generally the clubs are like positive to each other's faces, but then maybe slightly have some problems behind each other's backs. And I think that that's sort of how the relationships often are. But certainly Chelsea have a good relationship with Brighton. They've gave Brighton a lot of money lately, and also they've taken a sporting director from Brighton. So there's actual, genuine friendships. And in football, people accept that you're going to move around. So, there's people working at Man United who used to work at Chelsea, same with Liverpool and Man City and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that going on. And
my theory on the Chelsea-Arsenal bromance, if you like...
It is a bromance.
Is that they both hate Tottenham.
Yeah.
And, there's no chance that Tottenham are going to do business with Arsenal and Chelsea, especially after, like you say, after the Sol Campbell deal, for example, things like that. But if a player wants to stay in the capital, there are still 3 clubs of biggish size that they can go to. So rather than go from Arsenal to Spurs or from Chelsea to Spurs or vice versa, it's easier to go from Arsenal to Chelsea and vice versa, isn't it?
I know. Chelsea and Spurs rarely do deals, and similar with Arsenal. And also the good example of this is Pochettino. So there was a sense that he would never, move across the city to Arsenal. But with Chelsea, he was sort of willing to do it. So there's another one there as well, where there's that sort of sense of a little bit of rivalry. But I don't know. Maybe actually Spurs fans are quite upset about the move as
I think they will be quite upset, to be honest.
I think there's a lot of Spurs fans who just sort of still would love to see Pochettino at Tottenham, and they'll just find it really upsetting to see him leading a Chelsea team, especially at the Tottenham Stadium. That'd be a strange one.
Tottenham have had a lot of Chelsea managers as well, to be fair. Even if they've not had a lot of Chelsea players. But I think that what I was told,
Villas-Boas.
One fan told me it's fine if they're not successful, but if they're successful, then
that's when it stings.
Yeah. I'm not expecting too much from Chelsea right away, but I think they've got the right manager in absolutely for what they've got to do. So in a way, I'm really positive, but in a way, I'm also like, this is going to take time.
For you as well. For me, watching from the outside with Graham Potter, the relationship between him and the owner is really, really important, isn't it? Especially with the owner buying players. Maybe I found that Graham Potter looked to be quite oblivious at times with some of the players that are coming in. So do you find the key factor going into this season is Poch really creating a good relationship with Todd Bowley to then not only have an impact on the pitch, but then it adds a massive impact to fans watching around the world?
You definitely have to manage upwards in these clubs and in these top jobs, and Pochettino had a tough, we talk about Spurs, but he's at PSG as well, which was quite tricky, so he's got a bit of that chaos at Chelsea maybe to deal with, although it does feel a bit more controlled now than last season already, because they've got 2 good sporting directors in, one from Brighton and one from Monaco, so they've got Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, and they're doing the business more than Todd Bowley, so he's taken a step back. He knows a bit of what's going on, but he's not doing the day-to-day. So they've got like dedicated football men in the job now, so hopefully that will also help, and Chelsea will be a bit more coordinated and keep people happy that they need to keep happy, which they failed to do last season, and also make more considered signings. I think it felt sometimes like they'd signed people too early. Maybe there's 4 players for this one spot sometimes last season, so they can't be doing that again, and they need to move to a more considered approach.
And to also ease your headaches on how many articles you have to write on how many players Chelsea are signing.
January was a bit of a shock, let's say.
I did think that. One a day. I think 2 a day, wasn't it?
Yeah. Just one quick question about Poch, because we were in that briefing with Todd Burley, the new owners, when they came in, and they did a sort of off-the-record briefing about, Graham is our man. It's a 5-year project, and then, a few months later he's gone. I mean, Poch, you think he's going to be there long term, but there's still no guarantees. I mean, just before coming in, I look back on, I've been covering Chelsea since the late 80s, so 34 years. Pochettino is the 28th manager I've dealt with in that period at Chelsea, going back to Bobby Campbell. Right? And in their first 60-odd years, 62 years, they had 7 managers. They've had 28 in the last 34. So long-term manager sort of reigns at Chelsea just haven't happened, have they, for a long time?
I think he
will need time, won't he? He needs a few years to turn it around.
He will need time. I hope the expectations are realistic. So probably get a bit of a sense of that on pre-season, like how realistic the expectations are. And I'm hoping that, you know, Europa League finish even would be acceptable for him, because I think that would be a relative achievement coming from where they've come from. And with all the new players, a lot of them are very young. So try and do that. I mean, the Premier League as well is harder than ever. Everyone's rich now. Everyone's won the lottery in the Premier League. So yeah, Chelsea one of the richest teams in the league, but they all are now. Villa are very aggressive in the transfer market, and Newcastle. So it's a lot of players to deal with. So I think that's going to be tricky. And just think that Chelsea do want a long-term manager. They have for a while. I think for the old owners wanted Tuchel to be the man potentially, but then new owners had different ideas. So it's just like there's always something in Chelsea's sphere that pulls them off course, and certainly they wanted Potter to be the main guy, but and now they want Poch. So I think they do want that. He's only got a 2-year deal, which is a bit concerning, but I think there's good faith there that they want him to be a long-term manager, and we'll see. Football is chaotic, and most clubs are, but Chelsea seems to be just that little bit more.
Yeah, of course, loads of Spurs fans wanted Poch back, didn't they?
Yeah.
And from what we gather, Daniel Levy didn't even pick up the phone, maybe because he just thought, it's not going to happen here, don't come back. Yeah. But what do you think of Postecoglou? Because I think there's been a mixed reaction, but I think most Spurs fans who got sick of the sort of Mourinho, Conte, Nuno style of football. It was very defensive, wasn't sort of Tottenham style. They're quite excited about him, aren't they?
Yeah, I think he's a good, probably project manager, which is nice. I think that's what they need. I think maybe,
they need a reset as well, don't they?
They need a reset as well. Daniel Levy's idea was probably, with Mourinho and with Conte, we need to win now, and they didn't really get there, did they? And it's unfortunate. And then the club's left in a worse position. Now they're left picking up the pieces, needing a manager to start and build a culture, because I think a lot of Spurs fans are also, similar to some Chelsea fans, are a bit disconnected, aren't they, with the club, and it's been a pretty abysmal season as well. It's a similar outcome to what Chelsea had, just maybe a bit less chaotic, and then some of the good players are getting older. Kane might move on at some point, maybe even this summer. There's a lot to do for Ange, but I think it's maybe a good fit. He's seen as a progressive manager. Of course, it's a step up for him, so we'll see how he can do in the most difficult league in the world, and that's probably where the slight unknown is, because he's been in sort of lesser leagues for most of his career.
And Maddison's a good step up, a good sign of intent as well, because he's an attacking midfield player.
Yeah.
We get the impression Ange wants to play on the front foot, doesn't we? Yeah. And I think that's what Spurs fans want to see, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think my colleague Dan Kilpatrick, who covers Tottenham a lot, he made a great comment.
Dan, yeah.
He made a great comment where he's just like, it's as close as Spurs can get to like a definite sort of quality player, because it's just, we know he can play in the Premier League, and we know he's an England international. So with Spurs in the market that they shop in, it's an absolutely exceptional signing. And you know what? He could compete with players like Mason Mount. That's what he's looking to do. He's looking to outshine, those sort of rivals, so he can play in the Euros with Gareth Southgate. And maybe he can.
And Ange Postecoglou and Pochettino are sort of very similar in the sense of they're two managers that have come into two clubs that are in dire need of a good project. Have you found that's been the biggest similarity with them two going into nenext season?
Yeah, I think so. I think they'll be both sort of doing the same job really as each other. Maybe Poch will have a bit more budget than Ange, but I think that's probably where they'll be. And I also think maybe Spurs have a better squad than Chelsea right now, so it's a very, very similar situation, and those two teams are probably right up beside each other in the table. So they're direct competitors now for next season.
And interestingly, and Spurs fans won't want to hear this, but what Burley and Bedad was saying about what they were doing, hoping Graham Potter was going to bring. They looked at the Arsenal model and the success they got with Arteta, sticking with a young manager who had a clear way of playing and giving him time, and that really came good for Arsenal last year, didn't it? And Chelsea were basing their plan on that, and they probably are to some extent. And maybe that's what Tottenham need to do, and start looking at what Arsenal have done.
Yeah, I think that Chelsea really viewed what Arsenal did really positively, and they thought Potter could do it. And I think that they really waited till the last minute. I mean, fans were really calling for his head. So I think that a lot of clubs are looking at that. You know, it didn't really take Guardiola time, but it took Klopp a lot of time as well. So he's actually the blueprint, not Arteta, but Arteta's certainly a recent good example.